They say we're loud, opinionated, afraid, telling us to hush, dim our historical light. But darlings, we're the heartbeat, sharp and keen, unveiling the truth behind the silver screen.
History harpies hear us roar. Through the ages we explore. Fashion, film, and TV's lore. Spilling tea, wanting more.
From silent films to reality.
Hi, welcome to History Harpies.
I'm Lauren,
And I'm Christine.
and we're so excited to have you back. We've been away for a little while with summer break and all kinds of business taking place on our ends, but we are excited to talk today about things that have been going on in pop culture, and we're going to do an episode on the Brooke Shields of it all, tying Brooke Shields into some of the more contemporary discussions surrounding Sydney Sweeney and some other influencers / brand ambassadors.
And we think about Brooke Shields a lot as a wonderful example of, I think we can call her Gen X.
Absolutely.
I think that's fair to say. She's probably in her late 50s now, I would guess. And of course has been around as a really important cultural figure since the 1970s. I certainly can remember her from my childhood. And she was so famous. And I'm not sure, I don't know if you agree with this. And of course, we'll talk more about Brooke later. But I would guess that people who are, say, your kid's age, my kid's age, they don't realize how famous Brooke Shields was.
And I would agree with that. They not only have not heard of Brooke Shields, but would probably be stunned to know that she was at one point Beyonce, Taylor level stratosphere in terms of magazine covers, films,
Name recognition, face recognition.
and was a brand since she literally was a baby.
Since she was a baby. And we'll talk more about Brooke. She is going to be the focus of our episode today. But first, I do want to ask Lauren what she has been up to.
Okay, well, so I have two things that are on my mind. The first is that my son is leaving for college next week. We are actually recording in a room with all his stuff that he's taking to college. And so having two kids in college is a major milestone, and I'm both very excited for him, but also feeling very sad.
Understandably.
So there's that. The other, which I can probably go on much longer about, but will not because we already had 2 hours,
2 hours.
on this,
2 full
is
hours.
that, and just like that, is over. And I am gleeful that it is, because I no longer feel required to attend in ways that my students probably feel like they're required to attend my classes. But to watch it and be tortured and traumatized and then have to go through the and just like that therapy, that era is over. But the finale, which you haven't seen yet.
I have not, although I did read a recap.
It really was a piece of shit. And I think that the featuring of actual shit at the end of the episode.
I can't even.
Sorry to spoil for those
Spoiler
of you who
alert.
haven't seen it.
Literally,
but
spoiler alert.
A toilet full of shit is one of the last things you see in this episode, and in some ways the creators couldn't have summed the whole thing up better. I don't know whether that was deliberate or some sort of, I don't know.
It might have been the AV Club recap that I read, because I think I read one more, that said in the finale, the series finale to the OG series, right, you have these iconic lines, right, you have these huge dramatic moments, we're in Paris, right, all of these things, we're like, go get our girl, right, all of these things.
And the fantastic, memorable outfits.
Yes, absolutely.
I mean, just over the top styling and just incredible. Like, everything had built up to that climax. And this is just, again, it is a piece of shit.
I will watch it.
Yes.
But I don't want to rant, because I agree with you. I mean, we already spent 2 incredibly awesome hours on it. So we have to restrain ourselves today. But it is really interesting to me, the choice to say that Carrie is going to be single the rest of her life, that this is somehow empowering, that this is great, she's choosing herself, right, all of this stuff. When, of course, Sarah Jessica Parker, I'm going to guess, has actually zero conception personally at this point of what being alone is like. And, of course, definitely, Sarah Jessica Parker has no conception about what being alone in her 50s, 60s, and 70s is like, right? This is a woman who in real life has been married to Matthew Broderick for what, 20 plus years now?
A long
and
time.
as far as I can tell, was a serial monogamist, right? Before that, dating Robert Downey Jr., right? There was just someone else she was in the news for having dated. And that's really interesting to me to sort of frame an experience that actually she doesn't know about as something that is empowering, a choice that people should not criticize. And I think that's interesting. Now, Michael Patrick King himself might be experiencing sort of living as an older person alone, but I think it's interesting that that is what we end up with on the show.
And Sarah Jessica Parker, if I'm going to channel her for a second, would always say she's the Carrie opposite, right? She's very prudish, and in the series, she wasn't, right? And just like that, some people have made this argument that the Sarah Jessica Parker of it is much more in and just like that, the real person, rather than the Carrie Bradshaw, running around, smoking, bed hopping. That's not Sarah Jessica Parker. But again, I think as you aptly point out, neither is being alone.
Exactly.
And so some of the again, lack of identity for the show, schizophrenia. Again, at one point, and you may have read this in the same AV Club review, we find out Miranda is bipolar. And you're like, what? What? The woman who, like, you know, went to Harvard Law School and has been, like, super type A, focused. And then Steve's like, well, maybe just kidding. And you're like, what? Okay. You were married to this woman for how long? Okay, again, this is not the episode, it's over. It's over.
I hope so. I hope that unlike some vampiric thing,
like a bad horror movie,
the zombie,
it's going to pop up again. Although the Gilded Age is renewed,
which is
all
good
the
news.
money can go over to that.
Let's hope.
Cynthia Nixon is fantastic on the Gilded Age.
She is. She's really great.
And so we don't. I mean, at least one of the ladies has employment on HBO, and again, maybe the others are just fine to go off and maybe hang out with Kim Cattrall or whatever.
So there was no then Samantha moment, text, phone
no,
call.
No, they left it with her, again, the absence of her. But 3 new millennial or Gen Z characters with odd names who do peculiar things.
Well, maybe there'll be a spinoff.
Brady,
Baby Mama, and the characters with bizarre names.
3 Gen Zs and a Brady.
And then that Lisette, the woman who bought Carrie's apartment and turned it into a bizarre, the gun-toting roommate in the weirdo. Anyway.
By the way, if I have to hear the woman, now that phrase now is tainted forever by this fucking awful show.
Wait, did I send you? I meant to, and then I think something got in the way. Someone on the Reddit, and just like that thread, made an AI cover of the book, The Woman by Carrie Bradshaw. And it was this sort of AI, kind of like soft focus, older version of Carrie in a Victorian dress holding a cat. I'll send it to you. It's so fantastic.
Yeah. Please send it, and maybe put it in the show notes.
Yes, well, yes, I will absolutely do that. Credit to whoever did it on this Reddit thread.
That is awesome.
Anyway, but we should probably move on, because otherwise we
So how was your week, besides the And Just Like That?
How was my... Well, I was very actually pleased with what happened in the Gilded Age. I thought that was a mostly satisfying episode. I'm very pleased that George recovered from a gunshot wound in approximately 5 minutes.
Although I think he will be have an opiate addiction coming up.
Totally. We got that zoom in on the laudanum bottle. Drug addict. We are picnic in Hanging Park, in Needle Park. Anyway. Panic picnic in Needle Hanging Rock Park. Anyway, so school of course started this week, and we will see how that goes. And
everyone is okay.
So
and
far,
no calls from administrators.
I had one yesterday. So
check it off your bingo card.
Yeah, check it off the bingo card. First call from administrator. First 0 on the report, on the daily report. So we're starting strong.
There we go.
We are starting strong. Starting strong on the bingo card. Okay, well, Lauren and I have talked before in the past about doing an episode about Brooke Shields, but of course what really led us to do it this time now is because of the kind of brouhaha about Sydney Sweeney and her jeans ad with American Eagle. I'm sure all of our devoted 5 Faith Militant.
It's definitely 10.
Okay, 10 Faith Militant. We love you, Faith Militant. That American Eagle, she had done these advertisements for jeans over the summer. Tons of buzz, a lot of backlash to the ads. Apparently, they've been selling like the proverbial hotcakes.
References to eugenics and Nazism and racial purity and all kinds of stuff.
All kinds
associated with this ad.
Yes.
Which many people, including myself, did not realize was an ad that Brooke Shields had done for Calvin Klein that was very deliberately about genes, good genes, good
G-E-N-E-S.
physical qualities, hereditary properties, etc. So it was a derivative ad, the American Eagle one.
Yes, very expressly. And I think part of the reason why we tend not to remember that component of the Calvin Klein ads from 1980 is because the line that really sort of kept on was that line about nothing gets between me and my Calvins, and if I don't have enough money for both my Calvins and the rent, I don't pay the rent. Right. These real zingers. Real zingers. And of course, disturbing in the sense of nothing gets between me and my Calvins, understood at the time to be a very suggestive sexual reference with the 15-year-old Brooke Shields.
And not in any way, I would say, I don't remember. I mean, maybe somebody was paying attention to this, but there wasn't the same attention to the racial purity aspect of that ad and the use of the word jeans with a G.
Yes, not at all. I don't recall that
Nobody was saying this is Nazi propaganda.
Nobody was saying that in 1980.
And again, this is Nazi propaganda is an interesting response to that ad.
It is. It is, and certainly one of the questions that came up, of course, was, is it possible for someone like Sydney Sweeney to be a beautiful white woman, 27, 28, I think you said?
Sure.
And to be in an ad like that, would there have been the same reaction if say, Beyonce had been... Zendaya,
her co-star.
Yes, Zendaya had been in an ad.
Is it Zendaya or Zendaya? I never say it correctly.
I don't say it correctly either, but I think it's Zendaya.
Okay. If her Euphoria co-star Zendaya was in that ad, would there be the same response?
And I don't think there would be.
I don't think there would be.
And it is interesting, and certainly you know more about the history of American advertising, much, much more than I do, because I only know about it from watching Mad Men. But one of the things that's interesting is that backlash really assumed, we were in that very murky and sort of strange territory of the quote-unquote dog whistle, which to me is a really problematic concept.
Yes.
And the idea, so nobody, of course, was saying, oh, it's classic subliminal advertising, which was genuinely done in the past. But it was more that, oh, this is kind of a dog whistle. It's appealing to a particular a racist demographic. People are going to understand the history of eugenics. And you do have to ask, it's a stupid question, but the important one is, if nobody knows what eugenics are, then is it quote-unquote problematic to have this ad?
Right, and would most people read it as, it's not crazy town to have a beautiful, white, blonde woman selling jeans.
Yes.
Although then a lot of people started talking about, well, we have gotten, thinking about body positivity, thinking about inclusivity, having, bodies of all sizes working for, representing Athleta or representing other brands, plus size, people of color, and that this is in some ways a sort of slap in the face to the direction of advertisers that are trying to accommodate a much wider scale of representations and races and that sort of thing. And so then the question becomes, well, can we have a model who might enforce, unrealistic expectations for women? Are we back to that?
Well, I guess I would say two things about that. One is that to me, and maybe I'm just, I don't know, being weird. To me, her body, of course, is so different, right, from that Kate Moss,
Yes.
90s heroin
Yes.
chic,
Yes.
right, where you're like, eat a burger. You clearly have an
Sure.
eating disorder. Again, you're just doing coke all night. To me, her body, of course, many, many women don't look like Sydney Sweeney.
Right.
But it's not as if this is a body that screams, again, bulimia. Right.
No.
She has curves, right? So that's one
She
thing
is
I would
more
say.
on the Kardashian track.
Yes, absolutely.
In terms of being, having, again, as you say, curves.
Yeah.
She isn't 70 pounds.
She looks
yet.
healthy. She looks
She
healthy.
does. She looks healthy. She does. But again, the Kardashian vibes, although they look differently,
yes.
but the whole healthy body,
Yes.
I would say.
Yes.
And we can talk about whether the Kardashians are healthy
Yeah,
bodies
or
or not,
not.
but the idea that, again, having larger breasts or, again, not being waif thin
Yes.
is acceptable and admired.
Yes. Well, and then the second thing I would say is that it really can't be the case, I think, culturally. It can't be the case that that diversity, inclusion, body positivity means that a white woman in an ad necessarily is a slap in the face. And so one thing that's interesting to me is that if the tagline had been different,
Yes.
would there, of course, be the same backlash? And
Yeah.
because I was talking with a friend who said, oh, but if they had put in a brunette, maybe that would have been the smarter choice. But again, do we really want to be at the point, and I said this to my friend when we were having this great conversation about it, do we want to be at a point where you say, oh, well, you can never put a blonde white woman in an ad.
Blue eyes.
With blue eyes, because that in itself is ridiculous.
Right.
And so, yeah, go ahead. You were going to say something.
Right. And so the Sydney Sweeney of it all led us, of course, to think about Brooke Shields. And many in the press drew the comparison
Yes,
too.
absolutely.
And thinking about Brooke, again, as advertising jeans, as a brand ambassador for Calvin Klein, and of course the controversy that all brought up for the reasons that Christine just mentioned and these taglines. And so what we decided to do was to watch two films that neither one of us have seen recently.
Had seen before, but not
had
recently.
seen before.
Yeah.
And to sort of think about the meaning of Brooke Shields at the time and the connection between Brooke Shields in these films and then the larger milieu of young girls, advertising, sexuality, and the kinds of debates that she stirred up in the 70s and the 80s when she was sort of at the height of her fame.
And one thing, Lauren, that you pointed out that I think is really astute is that when those Brooke Shields commercials came out, again, the focus really was on that adolescent sexuality. And obviously that was not a dynamic with Sydney Sweeney.
Right.
Because she is an adult. And so it is interesting to think also, how would we react today with a 15-year-old in ads like that? Because it was controversial. The Brooke Shields jeans ad, it was controversial.
Yes.
But of course, it was amid this entire sort of span of her early career in which she was being pretty thoroughly sexualized, right? It was part and parcel of the movies that we watched and other things.
But even as Brooke Shields says in that documentary about her called Pretty Baby, this would never, the age part of it would probably never happen now. That even say like a Kaya Gerber, who was modeling, and I mean, she may have been modeling when she was 13 or 14, I don't know. But she would not have been featured in a Pretty Baby kind of film.
Yes,
It
exactly.
just would never happen now.
It would
and
not.
she might walk the runway, but she wouldn't be featured in ads as a 14, 15-year-old in a sexually provocative way.
Yeah, and that's, I think, something to remind ourselves about before we start talking about the films, is to think about, say, not just a magazine like 17, which of course Brooke was on, right? Whitney Houston was on when she was a young model, but something like Vogue, Harper's Bazaar, they had young teenage girls as the face of the magazine occasionally. And I think about that a lot. You know, there were 14-year-old models like Brooke Shields who were on the cover of Vogue, which again, something else, right, that would not happened
Naomi
today.
Campbell in that other documentary that
Oh,
we saw.
yeah,
that I
of course.
can't remember now. I can't remember the name of that documentary.
I think it's just called like Supermodels or something, isn't it?
But Naomi was quite young.
Yes, you are right. You're right.
When she started modeling and was in British Vogue and in things like that.
Yes, and it was just it was the norm.
Yeah.
Right. It was the norm, and not that translates necessarily to the kind of films that Brooke Shields was in. And so the two films that Lauren and I watched, one was Pretty Baby, which came out in 1978. Directed by the great French director Louis Malle. This is probably not the best example of by which Louis Malle. We should judge him.
This is the blame it on Rio.
It is.
It's like you take a great director who has done a million amazing things, and then goes to this creepy, bizarro world.
This place you just don't want to be. And I had forgotten, even if I had known in the first place, that the cinematographer of Pretty Baby is Sven Nykvist, who worked with Ingmar Bergman and then worked with Woody Allen, which I don't know if we want to really explore that connection, but anyway. And so yes, and
especially with young girls.
Yes, especially with young girls. But the screenwriter of Pretty Baby is a woman called Polly Platt. And Polly Platt was really important in 1970s cinema because she was the wife of Peter Bogdanovich, who was one of the kind of young, up-and-coming directors who did Paper Moon, Last Picture Show, and he left Polly Platt for Sybil Shepherd. In this notorious way, falling in love with her while making Last Picture Show. But then Polly Platt continued to be this trailblazer of women in Hollywood. And she wrote the script for Pretty Baby, which I think is interesting. Interesting
that it was written by a woman.
And so we can't just dismiss it as being this kind of male gaze, creepy Lolita sort of thing. So really quickly, our little plot summary. Pretty Baby is set in 1917 during World War I. It is set in New Orleans, in a Storyville, an area of New Orleans where prostitution was legal, and a whorehouse, and Brooke Shields plays a 12-year-old girl.
Are we still allowed to say whorehouse? Do we have to say sex worker house now?
No, we're saying whore. I'm saying whorehouse.
I'm just wondering.
I'm reclaiming the word whorehouse. Okay. You could say sex worker house.
No, I don't. I don't really care. I'm just, as a historian of sexuality, I'm now realizing, have I read the word whorehouse in a book?
I love that word.
Recent.
Well, no, like best little whorehouse in Texas.
Yeah, okay, all right.
You can say sex worker house.
Okay, no, it doesn't have the same. It doesn't have the same ring off the tongue.
Well, it was actually in the film's description on the site that I watched it on, and perhaps you too. It referred to Susan Sarandon's character as a hooker, and I was like, no, I wouldn't use that word. She's not a hooker.
She's definitely not a hooker.
She's not a hooker. She is a prostitute living in a bordello.
In a house of ill
repute.
If we go to the Gilded Age.
Cat house. How about cat house? Cat house. Yes, house of ill repute, as we learned in the Gilded Age. Anyway, so Brooke Shields plays Violet, a 12-year-old girl who has been born into this house of ill repute because her mother, played by Susan Sarandon, is a prostitute there. And so this is depicted as kind of this lively space with all of these kind of prostitutes and sort of this kind of family situation. There's more than one child around.
Yes.
The very first scene is Violet watching her mother give birth to her little half-brother.
In a way that is interestingly cut.
Yes.
That you do not know whether she's watching her mother have sex or whether she's watching her mother give birth.
Yes,
which
it's
is
very disturbing.
Very, very disturbing.
Because she's standing at the foot of the bed and we have this close-up on Brooke's face. Right. And so one of the interesting things about Pretty Baby is that it's based on the career of a real photographer, E.J. Bellocq, played by Keith Carradine in the film, who did actually beautiful photographs of the prostitutes in Storyville. And he becomes enmeshed into the life of this whorehouse. Sorry. I love it. I'm just going to keep saying storehouse. I'm going to keep saying whorehouse.
Again, if people write in and want to counsel you along with American Eagle, then so be it.
Anyway, House of Ill Repute is just too long to say. So one of the many controversial things about Pretty Baby was the degree of nudity with Brooke Shields herself at age 12.
Yes.
And there are claims that she is wearing a body stocking for almost all of the scenes. I'm not sure that is
about that
reality. reality. So what is your take on Pretty Baby?
Well, my take on Pretty Baby was the same feeling, a similar feeling as Blame It on Rio at the end, which is I need to take a shower because this is so just disturbing on so many levels, but a different level because, of course, Blame It on Rio is supposed to be this, sex comedy, fun, frothy thing.
Yes.
And Pretty Baby is supposed to be art, the Louis Malle of it all,
art film,
and the art house vibes, which it isn't, in my opinion. It doesn't have these broader questions and meanings, and I'm not thinking about larger issues. I really felt uncomfortable watching it. There is violence towards the Brooke Shields character. Of course, there's that famous scene where she's paraded out the night that she's going to lose her virginity and gets basically bidded out to
men who are
there. And there's, of course, a parallel, implicit parallel to slave auctions and the larger history of New Orleans in that.
Which, if I can interrupt for 1 second, which is done, that's actually my favorite scene in the film. Not the auctioning off her virginity, which is repellent, but during that scene, we have a close-up on the professor, the Antonio Fargas character, who is the piano player in the whorehouse.
Right.
And it's just on him. When you hear the bids for her, which is really great.
And so it's not as implicit. I mean, to me, you're supposed to think there's this black man hearing this white woman being sold off to the highest bidder, and you're supposed to think about the slave trade.
Yes.
And so that it's provocative in places. I'll take back that I didn't think about anything, but the, as you say, repellent nature of most of it involving this 12-year-old girl and her being passed around among these men, and then to me one of the most disturbing scenes is the one among the kids.
Yes, I agree.
When she and the other kids who are children of people who work in the whorehouse are questioning each other's experience, and then they're bullying and assaulting this young boy who is screaming.
Yes, and is clearly much younger. And
this kid could be 8.
Yes.
I mean, 7 or 8.
Yes.
I mean, that these kids have had no experience and no exposure to anything outside of this brothel, whorehouse, whatever word we're using. And their lack, on the one hand, they're very knowledgeable, of course, about sex and sexuality, but not about any boundaries or what's appropriate or what kids their age should be doing. They don't go to school. They're obviously very, very poor. And the idea also that Violet knows that she's going to start working along beside the other women, and that she then moves from man to man, and it's in an uncontested way. I mean, we can't really talk about consent. I mean, she is 12 years old. I mean, she's a girl, doesn't know anything else. And then she gets involved with the Keith Carradine character, who she eventually marries. And of course, for her, she needs a parent. She needs a caretaker. She just needs something. And the only way she knows how to get that is through her sexuality. And it is, again, it's heartbreaking. She also gets abandoned by her mother, who goes off to, when she meets a wealthy patron. And again, the question, I don't know whether the question at the end of the film is to make you wonder whether this is a critique of exploitation, whether it's a critique of sex workers and that world, or whether it's supposed to be an honest artistic portrayal.
And I think my guess would be the latter. And I guess I also think about it in the context of French films that are intended just to be, this kind of impression of life, we're showing
realism.
Social realism. Again, we're just doing this, it's just people talking or people having these experiences, and we as directors or writers, we're kind of stepping back. And obviously we see that in 1970s American film too, but where there isn't so much, right, this attempt at an arc or attempt to sort of provoke those bigger questions. I mean, I agree, it's very hard to tell. Is the film condemning exploitation? Is it being exploitative? Is it doing both? Right? Which, as you know, I mean, I think is the case with Nora, where basically the director is like, oh, look, you know, here's this empowerment, but we get to see your boobs. And what is, of course, I think so interesting a question to me about Pretty Baby. I mean, there are many, but just to make it really clear, we have, for at least half the film, a 12-year-old having sexual relationships with men who are depicted, right, not as being significantly older, right? We keep seeing men in their 40s and 50s. Not that it would make a difference. Let me make that clear. There's a reason I'm going to say that. Men who are physically much bigger than her. Where she's
just
tiny. She's tiny,
little
flat chest, right? She's obviously prepubescent.
Right.
She is a 12-year-old girl, right? This is not a voluptuous,
it is not a girl who can, and it is not a 12-year-old girl who can be mistaken for an older girl.
Not at all. She looks like a child.
Yes.
And so we have all this really, really disturbing. I mean, Lauren, you mentioned the auctioning off the virginity scene. We even see, right, her go upstairs with that man. We see them in the bedroom together. We see her on the bed, naked afterwards, right, with a sheet. And so we're then told explicitly she has had so many customers that now she's made money from it.
Right.
And what is most disturbing in some ways, and less in others, it depends upon how you want to see it, she has a sexual relationship with the Keith Carradine character.
Yes.
And that's something else where we see her naked. And what I think is then so kind of disturbing, he is referred to by all of the prostitutes, including Violet, as Papa.
Right.
So, and he treats her like a child, and a lot of their conflict is because of that. And he buys her a doll.
He buys her a doll, but then he also has sex with her.
Exactly.
And and so that scene when she jumps on the bed at the very end
and breaks it,
and then he's sort of like, well, you can stay here, but then okay, I'm just gonna have sex with you.
Yes.
And he is, again, there's obviously conflict within him as to whether this is okay or not. Although at the end of the day, he's like, well, this is the only woman I can love.
Yeah, which is where the hell did that come from?
That's why this relationship is so confusing to me.
Yes.
Because he doesn't understand, and it's fine if he doesn't understand his feelings and they're puzzling to him. But when he's like, this woman is so special.
I can't live without her.
And I see her as a woman and as my wife and not as this child that I take care of, that I feel protective over, but also have sex with. It's not like that. It really does transform into a more traditional relationship by the end, at least the way that he describes it when Susan Sarandon comes back. And that's why I'm so puzzled. And I do wish that, especially since this is a true story, or, you know, like to get some sense of where he was coming from. And so, because he's both, it seems like he's grossed out by what's happening, but not so grossed out that he's not going to do it.
And that's what doesn't make sense, right? Is we have an explicit scene of him in the whorehouse saying to the madam, she is a child. What is going to happen to her? Right. And whether it's getting out of this life or whatever. And what we also have, although it only is like a tiny, tiny minute, but I think it's really important, we are explicitly shown a John in the whorehouse who rejects her because she is a child.
Right. And he says, because
I'm not into that.
But he also, I only sleep with women who have experience or who are, you know, actual adults.
Yes. And he's like, that's not my style. Right, that's not my style. Because obviously the madam has said to him, has whispered in his ear, like, oh, okay, you can have this 12-year-old virgin. And he's like, oh, no, you know, I'll put her on my lap and I'll kiss her and be creepy, but I don't have sex with 12-year-olds. Right. And then, of course, we're shown this man who does. And what I think is so interesting, and the reason why I brought up before, the men who are depicted as like sort of so much older and beefier, is that Keith Carradine's character, who does marry her, who's supposed to be different, right? Never has sex with the other women. Right. He's slim, he's slender, he looks very gentle, right? He is young.
And he's queer coded.
And he is queer coded.
And they call him a cream puff.
Yes.
They wonder in the very beginning whether he is even interested in women.
Yes.
So for a while you wonder, is this going to be somebody who's just kind of a friend of the house?
Friend of the house.
Taking the photos, and he's the quote artist.
Yes.
Right. he is queer-coded from the minute he walks in the house, which is so interesting that he then becomes sexually involved with her, and, I mean, maybe he's interested in men too, who knows, right? But that he's clearly interested in this child bride.
Yes. And I think what also could have helped that, I mean, still would be repellent, but of course we're also told by Violet that he is in love with her mother, the Susan Sarandon character, Hattie, before she leaves. And so I think if maybe they have done more work to say, like, okay, this is some sort of transference, and now that Violet is so sexually experienced, you know, he kind of has sort of confusion in seeing her. But then, you know what, the other thing I thought about, and this is also something you know about more than I do, is that then we also have to think about sort of marriage customs in the South in 1917, right? I keep going back to someone like Jerry Lee Lewis getting married when he's 13, right? To his 13-year-old cousin. And then later marrying another 13-year-old cousin. You know, this sort of thing where, oh, okay, we just sort of need consent, right? We're going to some sort of county where you can get married as soon as you're 12 or whatever. And nevertheless, right? But even knowing that intellectually, it
doesn't track.
It doesn't track.
But the other, again, the problem, it historically, right? Yes, people married young, very, very young, right? Is that he married somebody who was sleeping with so many men in this whorehouse in an acceptable way, and you sort of wonder, okay, if we say marriage for the traditional sense of family preservation, perpetuating the species, or whatever, okay, we can maybe swallow that, right? But the idea that she had been in a place where she wasn't safe, where nobody was looking out for her, and even him, right? And where now it's basically an SVU episode. It is. I mean, it is, right? I mean, there's no question about it that these folks, for Olivia and co, would be, you know, on the dark web.
Yes,
or
on the dark, again, checking the hard drive.
That this would not be okay, and there would be a scene with Olivia and Violet where she would have to explain, this is not consent. Right.
Yes.
Right. You
were groomed.
You were groomed, and also it's not your fault. And so the question also becomes with this issue of agency, right? Is anyone trying to say that this 12-year-old girl, Brooke Shields, right? And the other interesting thing, of course, from that documentary was Brooke Shields saying, you know, I just got into these characters, and then I was just my own Brooke Shields, like going to
healthy
the
and
mall,
well-adjusted,
and like
hanging out with my friends,
and I just like didn't think about being a
child
prostitute at all, which is fascinating.
It is fascinating, and whether we actually believe that assertion,
because
is another
clearly
thing.
It had some effect on her.
Yes, because she's still talking about it, right? I mean, in a way that Jodie Foster does not.
Right.
And I mean, as I think we've talked about before, I mean, the contrast, when you think of like our two movies from the 1970s that had child prostitutes.
Right.
This and Taxi Driver.
Sure.
And Jodie Foster, again, maybe in part because she has had such a diverse, interesting, long-lasting acting career, or maybe it's just, you know, a different sort of psychology about it. But we don't get the sense, right, that Jodie Foster is sort of returning to this, oh my God, I played a child prostitute. And I think that if Jodie Foster said the same kind of thing that Brooke Shields does, of like, oh, I just let it go immediately when the acting was over, I'd be more likely to believe Jodie Foster. But then again, also, if I remember correctly, there aren't nude scenes in Taxi Driver of a child where there's so many.
And also
Pretty Baby.
The other interesting thing of it all, you know, the documentary talks about this, is that Brooke's mother was just concerned about her like working too many hours and child labor laws and whether she was getting paid enough and things like that, but not about her being naked on set as a 12-year-old.
And basically simulating sexual relationships with men.
With much older men.
And this was something, you and I had talked about this a long time ago when the documentary came out, but to me, I mean, really, the most shocking thing and kind of maddening thing about that documentary is that Brooke Shields, you know, right, still to this day, pushes all of the responsibility of her exploitation on the creatives, right? And on the press, right? So it's the people who are making this stuff, the Barbara Walters asking her to compare measurements or something. And it's like, okay, I get that. And yes, perhaps you should be angry about to those people. But your mother had you do softcore porn shoots for a Playboy thing called Sugar and Spice when you were like 10.
Right.
And you can say, you know, her mother was an alcoholic, she was a single parent, you know, yada, yada.
All of it.
But to me, that documentary was so amazing because she doesn't blame her mother at all for putting her in something like Pretty Baby.
Right.
Who was supposed to be her protector.
Although other people like Laura Linney do say her mother was very volatile and her mother was drinking and her mother was she was not the kind of pushy momager that some other momagers are, but that she clearly wasn't consistent and was somebody that's very difficult. But those interviews went to other people. If I'm remembering
and I think
correctly.
I think that is a good memory. And of course, I mean, Brooke does mention that her mother was an alcoholic and that this was difficult, that the relationship was contentious, but that nevertheless, you know, she had this enormous dependence upon her mother, right? They were incredibly close.
Yes.
Her mom also almost has a breakdown when Brooke goes off to Princeton.
Right.
Can't stand the idea that they won't be living together. And I think that it's remarkable because I think if we did look at, you know, whether it's a momager or stage mom, whatever, who is putting a 10 to 12-year-old child in not just suggestive poses, but I am going to have my 12-year-old daughter be naked on a bed after she has supposedly just had sex with many adult men, I think we would condemn that person. And it was so interesting to me in terms of how Brooke Shields has kind of made psychological sense of this. She cannot condemn her mother for doing these things.
And
it's all been pushed out to other
people. In that documentary, there are so many clips of Oprah interviewing them or other people interviewing them and saying to her mother, "Hey, why are you doing this?"
Yeah.
And it's in the press, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So it's not like no one's paying attention.
People
to it.
were asking those questions at the time.
At the time, and people were not saying this is what we normally do with 12-year-old girls.
But of course, but her mother kept coming back to exactly this, right? Well, it's Brooke's decision, and Brooke is a normal child. She can pull out of it. She's
such a brilliant actress, and Louis Malle picked her out.
And Louis Malle picked her out of all of these other kids auditioning. And so I think, I'm sure her mother also, right, did a lot of work. Again, psychological and emotional work, and in order to rationalize putting her 10-year-old daughter. But it's so, the movie is really, I mean, it just is disturbing. And again, that's when I come back to Polly Platt writing it and saying, okay, what did Polly Platt, in effect, think she... And I do think it's interesting to say, okay, we know that this man did these photographs, right? There was a retrospective of them at MoMA in like 1971 or something. You can see that as being a really interesting story, right? And I can imagine Louis Malle saying, I want to explore New Orleans at the turn of the century and jazz and all of this great stuff in Storyville. But then you do have to say, why does it have to be about a child?
Why do we need to see a naked 12-year-old over 2 hours?
And over again.
There are ways to allude to things.
Yes.
There are ways to... And so one of my questions about it is this an attempt for art house cinema, right? Where we're like, well, we're going to throw convention to the wind. Yeah. We're going to do something different in American cinema.
Épate le bourgeois.
Right, in 1977. And just go for it.
Yeah.
And we have an actress who's willing. Yeah. We have a parent who's willing. And so we're just going to do it.
Yes.
And because it's Louis Malle, right? Yes. If it had been somebody else, maybe not. But an American director.
Yes.
And maybe the writing of it, Polly Platt's writing, didn't necessarily intend for the visualization of this naked 12-year-old for the whole film. Because, again, there would be ways to tell that story without seeing her doing all of it. In the same way that we did not have to see, and just like that, a toilet full of shit. I told you this before, right? I mean, you could have just said, there's a toilet full of shit overflowing in my next door.
There it is.
There it is.
We don't need to see it.
We don't need to see it.
Well, again, we didn't need to see, lap dances in Anora all the time either.
We did not. No. One would have done. One would have sufficed.
And actually, because, as a friend of mine would say, all things are connected, we do have to point out with And Just Like That and Pretty Baby that, of course, Louis Malle, the director, was married to Candice Bergen for many years until who was, of course, the editor of Vogue in Sex and the City. Right. And because I was just reading someone saying, oh, well, why wasn't Candice Bergen in And Just Like That at any point? And as we were just talking about, it might be the case that Candice Bergen and Louis Malle's daughter, Chloe Malle, she might be the next editor of Vogue.
Which sounds fantastic.
It's, again, all connected. And
although I do think Anna Wintour will always be the shadow editor of Vogue. I don't think that she is going anywhere ever.
Well, I think she's keeping the title. She is keeping the official
creative
editor,
director title.
Whatever.
But even if she's not the proper editor-in-chief of Vogue anymore.
I mean, I will maybe before we move on to talk about Blue Lagoon, one of the things I kept thinking of two things in watching Pretty Baby again. One was the film version of Lolita with Jeremy Irons, directed by Adrian Lyne, posted 9.5 weeks and Unfaithful. So I kept thinking about that because I think that ending part with Keith Carradine really sort of, is prescient about that. But the other thing I kept thinking about is, I don't know if you remember, but there's kind of this running joke in Seinfeld about Rochelle, the art film of a young woman's sexual journey from Milan to Minsk.
I always say, this is a Rochelle moment.
And Pretty Baby is a Rochelle, but that unfortunately, has a prepubescent 12-year-old naked for an awful lot of the time.
There's also not much of a journey going on.
There isn't really any journey at all. She's the same. She's the same.
And they're physically, she's in the same room or the same house the whole time. Yep. Anyway, yes. It is, my question, one of the questions of many that I had with Pretty Baby, where are they getting these great hairstyles?
Oh,
Brooke Shields, for being, again, a impoverished, sex worker, she has these masterful curls. Yes. She has these
braids.
Updos.
Yes.
She has more hairstyling, and I'm just sort of like, who's behind the scenes doing her hair?
Someone. Well, of course there is a staff at the whorehouse.
Okay.
So maybe. And of course, we have a lot of during the day, right? The girls are kind of hanging around and, reading magazines or whatever. So maybe they're just doing her hair. I would say one thing that is also, of course, so striking about Pretty Baby, and it still remains the case in Blue Lagoon, is that you see she was a shockingly beautiful girl.
Oh, yeah.
Just preternaturally beautiful.
Yes.
And it's just, you really can see, even if you're Louis Malle going through 300 girls,
sure,
right? To say, because I actually don't think she's a good actress. I think she's a pretty bad actress.
But
sorry,
the Blue Lagoon.
Blue Lagoon. Okay, let's move on to the Blue Lagoon.
But here's one thing I will say. Okay, somehow in Pretty Baby, the girls get some sex ed. Okay.
True.
We think.
Yes.
We are told they know how not to get pregnant and also how not to get the clap.
Yes.
Okay. Which, of course, is not the case in the Blue Lagoon.
Not the case.
So, again, this sex education, what they're learning, what they're not learning, their levels of literacy, their levels of just,
Yeah, she doesn't know how to read.
Right.
Which surprises Bellocq. I don't know why it surprises him, but it does.
Right. All sorts of things come up. All right. So we know that Brooke Shields is an incredible model and again, quite beautiful.
Very beautiful.
Her acting talent, again, if Pretty Baby put a question mark out there, and I do think most of the time, again, she's just like walking around and I don't know, the level of acting talent that's needed for what she did.
She did need a southern accent.
She did. But the Blue Lagoon is another story.
Would you like to sum up the plot, such as it is, of the Blue Lagoon?
Well,
which came out in 1980, just a couple of years after Pretty Baby. I think it's 1980.
Okay, so the Blue Lagoon, which takes place in
a deserted island.
Time frame. What do we think?
Oh, you know what? I actually know this. It's supposed to be like 1905, 1910.
Okay,
because that's when the novel it is based on came out. I think it's 1905.
So 1905, but it looks like ye old time.
Yes,
a boat. A a boat sailing for something with
San Francisco.
San Francisco. See, I a lot of this also I was just
Yes.
sort of like fast forward.
Yeah.
Okay. Sailing for San Francisco, these two young children, one Emmeline, who has lost her parents, and the other Richard
slash
who has his father on the boat, sailing,
And they're first cousins.
and they're first cousins, and fire breaks out, and everyone
jumps off the ship
and dies.
Chaos ensues.
Right, and Emmeline and Richard and
The cook,
Patty, who is kind of like a pirate, like skeevy
Drunken,
guy,
rough around the edges.
Yeah, likes to look
But
at
ends up being all the paternal,
naked pictures
looks
of
at,
women.
Yeah, the French postcards.
Okay, he has these two kids in tow, and they go to this island, and then he
dies
meets
maybe
his demise
a few years later,
Yeah,
a couple
they're
years
probably,
later.
I don't know.
Long enough for him to teach the children practical living survival skills.
And these kids can build them some shelter. They can
have
make
like
a fire.
palace.
These kids have built a major kind of White Lotus style resort. Okay. And so by the time he dies, they can survive on their own. And then we have a little montage in the water of again
where everyone's naked.
There are no one wears clothes
Everybody's
in
naked.
this movie. And they're swimming around, and then we see more mature bodies evolved, and we now
Time has passed.
and now we see
Puberty has happened, and is happening, and is happening.
And so we go from these kids, played of course by different people,
Yes.
to then Brooke Shields and what is that actor's name?
Christopher Atkins.
Has he ever been in anything else?
He was in a movie in the 1980s called A Night in Heaven. I don't know why I know that, but I do.
Girl.
Oh, where the Bryan Adams song "Heaven" or whatever comes from that movie. That second movie.
Okay,
the
all
Christopher
right. So
Atkins.
he's clearly has a lot of deep work happening with this guy. All right.
Yes.
So they're on the island, and in the beginning, they're discovering their new physical maturity, their emotional and sexual awakening, and at first they're wondering what's happening to them and
their
why
bodies,
they're
things are
having these
happening.
things are happening.
Things
why
are growing.
Why am I having
feelings are feeling?
Why am I having these feelings? Why does my stomach feel so weird?
Brooke gets her period in the lagoon.
Brooke gets her period in the lagoon, and they're not really sure what kind of relationship they're supposed to have with one another because of these feelings, and then ultimately they succumb they succumb to their desires,
and they do it,
and they have sex, and they have sex many times.
Not that we see it a lot.
No, but it's clearly over the course of maybe a year. I mean, we have no idea, because by the time that Brooke realizes she's pregnant, the baby is kicking.
Yes.
So,
although we don't actually see. At first, we don't see her stomach looking much bigger. Although then we do.
No, we
see
do.
her stomach looking big.
A little bit.
Looking bigger.
I mean,
and she gives birth out next to a tree.
Right.
Quickly. Which is great.
Right.
They have a child that they name after Patty.
Who is also naked.
The
whole time.
Yes. And then, well, I don't know if we should really spoil the ending. What do you think, Lauren? The ending is ambiguous. The ending is ambiguous.
Although I'm going to read it as hopeful.
Okay, and I actually have something else to say about the ending.
Okay.
So they are found in a boat. We're not going to explain how that all happens. All together.
Mama, Papa,
and baby. And they are actually found, finally, at the very end of the film, they are found by Richard's father, who has been looking for them for a very long time. And they have eaten these berries, which older Patty has referred to as the go-to-sleep berries.
But we don't know whether they go to sleep berries.
No, actually we do.
Oh,
I hate to amend this, but
sorry.
we do, because the baby Patty has eaten them, and that is a callback to an earlier scene.
No, I know that they go to sleep berries. I meant we don't know whether they really kill you.
Oh, yes.
That's what I'm saying. Yes, we know they are the berries,
but we don't know if they really kill you.
But we don't know if eating a handful of them is actually going to kill you.
So the movie actually ends in the same way, and I can't believe I know this, in the same way that the original novel ended, where I can even go further with this.
Oh, man.
Which is that the father says, "Are they dead?" And a sailor says, "No, they're just sleeping."
They're just sleeping.
And this is it. Fin. End.
Right.
Scene.
Right.
So we don't know if they have all three died. We don't know if they're ever going to wake up from their berry coma. But they have in fact been found. And we have very pointedly, we have seen an earlier scene where they see a ship and choose to go back into the jungle. They reject being rescued to live this paradisical life on the island.
And to celebrate their love.
And to celebrate their love. To celebrate their love.
Because they realize that on the outside world table, even though this is never discussed, they don't know. They don't know shit.
They don't know anything.
Okay, they don't know anything. They don't know why they're getting. She doesn't know why she's getting her period. He says, "Why'd you have a baby?"
Yeah.
They don't know.
No.
Anything.
They think babies come out of the cabbage patch, right? They have this.
They are completely clueless on anything. And in fact, there's a good scene I would say where they have the Christmas and they're trying to remember Christmas songs.
And Christmas songs.
And they only know like 2 lines because what are they going to remember from when they were 10 years ago or something like that? So they really are completely clueless. And I think it's not just that they don't want to interrupt their love, but they know that it's going to be difficult to function. Yeah. I might be reading into that because, of course, this isn't exactly, I don't know, Academy Award-winning screenplay. But it is curious that they have some feelings about interacting with the outside world.
And I do think, right, that there's, one of the things that is interesting is that, of course, what we keep seeing over and over again in terms of them going back to the outside world, right? They keep figuring out things on their own, right? The best example being nursing, right? Where they keep trying to feed the baby mango, this newborn mango. Right. And then we have this, miraculous moment where she holds the baby and the baby latches and she has milk and everything.
And she's like, oh, that's what these are for.
That's what's supposed to
That's what these boobs are for. Right.
Okay. Great. But we have also the sense that it's not that this is a subtext. I think it's probably pretty overt, and I think the original novel was probably this way, right? This idea that like this kind of Jean-Jacques Rousseau, right? You go back to a state of nature, and why is it that the West has all of these rules, for civilization, and so the idea that this is also, right, it's not just, we will have incredible difficulty sort of being out there back in the world, which is absolutely true, right? Although, Dick knows how to, like, weave things together and do knots and stuff, which is useful.
And he can probably play baseball.
And he can probably play baseball.
And he can fish.
Too. And he can fish. He's a very good fisher, right? Spearfisher. But that also the sense of that this way of life is more literally natural, right? That you have all these conventions and rules and clothes and all of this other stuff. And so it really is in some ways then this super cliche, right? This return to the state of nature where everyone is more simple and life is happier, which you can really see, right, in terms of the original book coming out in 1905 or whenever it was. And the one thing, I don't want to disappoint you, but one thing I also learned in my shocking deep dive into these novels is that there is a sequel to the Blue Lagoon. I don't mean the movie sequel with Mila Jovovich or whatever. I mean there's a book sequel. And even though the original novel ends with they're only sleeping, apparently there's a retcon and the sequel begins with they're dead. So anyway, I know that's just
in the sequel.
So the sequel is all about the kid.
So the kid lives.
Yes. So the kid lives, but like basically Brooke Shields and Christopher Atkins' character are dead. But much like with And Just Like That, we can forget that sequel IP exists and just focus on the uncertainty.
Sure.
But we do have, not to put too fine a point on it, Brooke Shields is again not as naked as she is in Pretty Baby, but we have a lot of long hair over the boobs, right, to sort of cover the boobs. A lot of just walking around, and again, she's 15 years old, right, when she makes this film. Right. This is another choice that her mother makes, right, to have an explicitly
sexual
coming
of age, first time of things, and also this focus on her and her body and how it's changing, and going from, again, getting your period to then giving birth, like maybe in a year or two. From this focus on her physicality, this focusing on her responses to her own sexuality. And again, when they were talking about whether, I don't know whether it's a documentary or whether I read something else, but that a lot of people were reading The Blue Lagoon as Brooke Shields' own sexual awakening in real life. Like, they were like, this movie is her like deflowering in real life because again, Pretty Baby, they were like, well, it's just a role. Yeah. But in Blue Lagoon, they're like, well, now that she's actually 15 and in real life might be experiencing these feelings, like now we get to see it on screen. Okay. We get to see this person that we've seen in pictures since she was literally a baby. Gerber baby.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Now we get to see her as a sexual being, and it's okay to see her that way. Whereas it wasn't okay to see her that way. Yes. When she was
prepubescent.
Right.
Yes.
Right.
In Pretty
So
Baby.
it's a real kind of like granular level of gaze. Okay. In a really creepy way.
Well, but okay. Remind me, because wasn't there also, in real life, there was this big, giant cultural conversation, because didn't she also say that she was a virgin? Yes. She was going to remain a virgin. Yes. And then she sleeps with Dean Cain in Princeton, right, which she talks about in the documentary.
Right.
And so there was also this sense of like, we're kind of all like, not quite having the timer on, right, but watching and waiting. Right, watching and waiting. And then she has this kind of faux relationship with Michael Jackson that a lot of people are like, that's just, okay, we don't know.
And in a way that in some ways, and this might not be a fair comparison, but it's coming to mind, mirrors Britney Spears. That kind of, again, started out very young, Mickey Mouse show, all of that, right? And then people started following her sexuality and wondering, Justin Timberlake and other people, and will she or won't she, are they? And you know, these questions about these young people who start out as child actors or child performers and then move into their teenage years, and people are starting to wonder about what they're doing, when they're doing it, and kind of chronicling it.
Well, and that was, of course, also the case with Jessica Simpson, who was another very public virgin. And then has a reality series about her finally being married and finally having sex with Nick Lachey. Right. And, so, okay, one more thing then that I think we need to talk about in our remaining few minutes. Okay. So we have Pretty Baby, which is extremely controversial, justifiably controversial, but has these aims to be a quality, quote unquote, art film. We have Blue Lagoon, which
commercial success,
and
everyone goes to see it.
Everyone goes to see it,
and it's sort of a defining '80s movie. And again, remembering it, I was like, "Oh, The Blue Lagoon! That was a great movie, and I enjoyed it." And I remember seeing it multiple times. And of course, Brooke Shields was so beautiful, and there was this pure relationship. And I went back to watch it and was like, "Oh my God, this is painful! Painful to watch. Swimming around in the water,
over and over.
Just and the acting is so bad. It's so over the top bad.
It's so this is a really interesting factoid that The Blue Lagoon was the first R-rated movie I was allowed to see at a theater. And I have thought ever since then, ever since 1980, that my mother intended that to take the place of our sex talk. I'm not kidding. I am 100% being serious. I think she thought she could go see The Blue Lagoon. We don't have to talk about menstruation or childbirth or anything like that. She'll just watch The Blue Lagoon. Okay. Anyway, but then...
Which raises more questions than provides answers, in my opinion, if you are someone who is looking to learn.
Exactly. Yes. It does not spell out things. And certainly I didn't think, wow, I should just be like on a deserted island somewhere, and it'll all come so naturally. These conventions of civilization are so terrible. You have to throw them off. Which, of course, is also underscored in the movie by the fact that we have these, like, quote-unquote savages, right, on the other side of the island, where it's kind of religious practice, and they're practicing human sacrifice.
And chopping heads
off. And that's where I think you really do see, it makes sense that this was a novel written, right, by some English guy in 1905.
That part I was sort of like, this is bonkers. It's bonkers. Like, why are they going over there and now seeing these again, these ritual sacrifices that I assume have been going on the whole time.
The whole time.
And somehow neither side met, and they're living in this like fantastic like faux resort, and this group of wild people, or however you want to think of them, have never seen their resort, and I'm just sort of
never killed them.
And never killed them. And again, the guy said they want to eat you.
And
Patty says they want to come and eat little kids.
And Patty says, don't go to the other side of the island. All they keep doing is going to the other side of the island.
That's true.
But it also did remind me then of in Lost, right? When they were the others.
The others.
Right? The others. These sort of, mysterious people. Anyway, so we have, as you say, so Blue Lagoon is this huge success. Brooke goes to Princeton, and the rumor, I don't know if you remember this, the rumor at the time was that she had wanted to go to Harvard, but that Harvard would not promise to accept her before she applied. And Princeton did.
Interesting.
So goes to Princeton, dates Dean Cain,
right,
but then really never, ever recovers her career. She has a sitcom briefly, right in the 90s.
Sure.
But is never able again to...
Isn't she on Seinfeld at some point?
She's in Friends, right? For one or two, a couple of episodes or something?
I know she was, right.
Okay.
She was on Friends, guest appearance.
Okay. And she did have Suddenly Susan as a sitcom.
Sure.
But she's not able, again, to do the Jodie Foster thing, where Jodie Foster goes to Yale and then comes out swinging.
And she's way more famous for marrying Andre Agassi.
Yes.
Than she is for doing anything on her own.
Like theater, and obviously she's done things, right? She's done theater, Chicago.
Right.
But I think that that's a really interesting object lesson.
Yes.
And it's not as simple as saying, she was just sort of exploited for her sexuality and her very great beauty and then kind of aged out of it. That's not an explanation.
No.
It's not, because again, Jodie Foster, right? Someone who was not a great beauty and certainly wasn't marketed that way in the 1970s in the way that Brooke Shields was.
And she wasn't a model.
And she wasn't a model. And I think that is, I do wonder. I don't want to say that Brooke Shields has struggled for relevance. I think that's a bad and unkind and ungenerous way to say it. But I do keep wondering, all of the kind of relitigation that she seems to experience, right, of her past, of even of her present, the focus overwhelmingly on aging. And I get it, right? It's a thing to say.
Sure.
Aging in Hollywood, whatever.
Sure.
But it is so... I do wonder, what is it like for Brooke Shields? You were such a great beauty.
And so going back to the Supermodels show,
which
does talk a lot about that.
Absolutely,
about aging.
absolutely.
You somebody like Cindy Crawford, who, stayed relevant in other ways, and then had her furniture line, and then
did other things.
House of Style, or and again, this is not the same level as the Blue Lagoon, but Cindy Crawford was, of course, and still is, a great beauty.
Yes, absolutely.
And was famous for many decades for just, again, her beauty and modeling and maybe some of these other things that she did. But the women in that documentary, and Linda Evangelista the most, because she had the greatest struggles of everyone, at least,
and still does,
at least the most documented struggles of the women,
and struggles that happened because she tried to maintain that same beauty that she had.
Yes, and so it's very interesting to compare those and to sort of think about the ways that, again, somebody like Jodie Foster has managed to keep a long career. Somebody like Susan Sarandon has been able to keep a long career, despite, again, aging, but also that Brooke Shields was so publicly controversial for the reasons that we're discussing, in ways that, again, Jodie Foster wasn't. And again, it's just interesting that the way that these different actresses or different figures, performers, however you want to think about them, get these attributes attached to them and become controversial. Again, going back to Sydney Sweeney, in the way that she is now controversial, and American Eagle's like, well, this was Sydney Sweeney's idea, actually, to do the jeans thing, and it's like, come on now. Right. I mean,
probably not.
I mean, whether or not, y'all are a big conglomerate, okay? But it's interesting what they're controversial for and how the controversies changed. Because going back to our first point, none of what we have talked about in this podcast has been linked to Sydney Sweeney, who again isn't young.
Yes.
She's not a child.
She's not the nubile Lolita. Yeah.
No, but again, the sexuality of it all, the questions of appropriate, none of that is, and Sydney Sweeney is naked in Euphoria, okay? I mean, topless, mostly. But, and again, it's all part of the plot, it's germane, it's certainly not Blue Lagoon or Pretty Baby gratuitous. But that never gets discussed as controversial either.
Well, and don't you think, and that this really is, we have to ask the bigger questions, not that we can do it now, but we have to ask the bigger questions of, in effect, why was the 1970s, right, so screwed up in terms of the sexuality of women and girls, right? I mean, even thinking really basically about nudity in film, right? Something that we really don't see anymore. And obviously something like Euphoria on HBO aside.
We do see it on, again, watching The Hunting Wives, we are seeing a lot of nudity on TV.
TV.
Streaming, prestige, whatever. I'm not talking about, like, Baby Girl, right? Or, I don't know. But there is a lot of nudity on TV. Again, nothing like Blue Lagoon level.
Yes. And maybe Honora is the only example of a film, right? I can think of where I mean, even Baby Girl doesn't really have. I mean, we see full frontal, like Christopher Atkins in the Blue Lagoon.
Yes.
Right? When he walks out of the water.
Right. No, totally.
There we go.
Totally.
And the kind of stuff that we
also see full frontal on And Just Like That. Although and the use of prosthetics in really just creepy and awful ways.
Yes. But so we're still back in this bigger dynamic, right? That we talked about in our very first episode, right? What is that kind of line between sort of whether it's artistic freedom, whether it's, again, throwing off these particular artistic and creative shackles, and basically just being a creep who's exploitative.
But some might say of us, Christine, are the two of those bitches just prudes. Like, we don't like a lot of nudity. We didn't like it in Honora. We don't like it in the Blue Lagoon. I mean, I don't think anyone's gonna like it in Pretty Baby. Okay? All right.
But here,
so that might be an accusation.
No, can I defend myself?
Yes!
I will say, and I am going to put, this as a nice segue into our book recs, because I'm going to put the link to Bellocq's photographs on our pod page. And I absolutely, the nudity in those photographs, it is beautiful. Because again, it's so when we see Brooke in Pretty Baby stretched out on the kind of divan, totally naked, which is Brooke herself, right? No body double. That is an adult woman in the photograph that is replicating. And so they're not all nude in the original photographs. Most of them are actually dressed or mostly dressed. But you really do see, right, these classic nudes, right? As in 19th century paintings, right? As in Greek statues. And so the nudity itself is quite lovely. But then, of course, we have to put on, do we need to see, again, extra lap dances? Do we need to see a 12-year-old girl, right? And it really is that thing where, of course, it's the most obvious thing to say, right? All of that 70s cinema that said, now that we can put in nudity.
We gonna. And we're gonna do it. And for me, it's the repetition.
Yes.
It's 20,000 lap dances. It's 20,000 shots of naked bodies in the water swimming around.
Over and over and over.
But not advancing any sort of narrative.
Yes.
And again, in The Hunting Wives, I would say, which, we may have some different ideas about, the nudity is advancing a narrative. And it is there for a reason.
And I welcome that.
Yeah.
I welcome that. And
nudity
I think
with some explanation.
Yes. I mean, again, I would have been totally fine seeing Nicole nude more often. Like, a good example in Eyes Wide Shut.
Yes.
Right. We see Nicole take off her dress. Right. She's changing. It's this very sort of domestic moment. The intimacy of this couple. And again, she's beautiful. She's naked. Obviously, it's not a sex scene in the context of a bigger film about sex, but it is absolutely necessary.
As it is in Basic Instinct.
Yes, I agree.
That character would never have a problem with nudity.
I agree.
And it is, again, in some ways, going back to Sex and the City, Sarah Jessica Parker, also known for her anti-nudity
Yeah,
causes,
sure.
and she's always wearing a bra, in her sex scenes, and in some ways you're like,
okay.
I mean, okay, right. I mean, and especially when the other ladies are more willing.
Yes.
Right. I mean, it's not a show where people aren't naked or topless or some.
As we just saw Cynthia Nixon in Just Like That, what a few episodes ago.
Yes. Those women have become more comfortable with nudity over time. Of course, Kim Cattrall was always comfortable with nudity.
Sure.
So again, I'm not exactly sure where we've gotten with all of this. I think it's our own diatribes against films with gratuitous nudity and repetitive nudity, and especially repetitive lap dancing.
Yes. And again, the question is something that is calling out exploitation.
Right.
Does it get an exploitative pass? Again,
Right.
as we talked about with Nora, absolutely the case with... I don't think Louis Malle thought he was being exploitative.
Right.
And obviously this was an outlier in terms of the films that he made, in the sense of dealing with adolescent or prepubescent sexuality, I should say. But that remains, to me, that's the boundary, right? The excessiveness, the gratuitousness, and whether, yes,
Well,
exactly
and
as you
I'll also,
say,
one
is it
addendum
serving
to
an error?
this.
Yes.
The nudity and Blame It on Rio. Okay, the problem with that nudity wasn't that they were topless. It was that they were with their fathers.
Yes.
If they had just been topless walking along the beach,
Yes.
that would have made sense. That would have made total sense.
And conversely, if they had been wearing halter tops, but with their fathers, it would still be disgusting.
Yes.
So, okay.
Yes. Okay.
So, I've already said that, one of my book recommendations that I'll put the link is to look at Bellocq's photographs, which are online. That will count for me as a book recommendation.
Okay.
And I hate to say it, but I am also going to recommend the book Lolita.
All right.
Because this is the fount of a lot of bad creative decisions. This very interesting and disturbing novel.
It is interesting and disturbing.
Yeah, it is.
But
It
a
is.
read that everyone should
Yes.
experience.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. So, do you have a book recommendation?
So my recommendation goes in a little bit of a different direction, but it is a book called Hope in a Jar by the historian Kathy Peiss, which is a history of really the cosmetics industry and advertising and the ways that different ideas about women and beauty evolve over time. It predates everything that we're talking about here, and it talks about all kinds of potions and creams, and it talks about some early founders, some unknown folks in the beauty industry. It also talks a great deal about race and Black women and their contributions to, again, the beauty industry. So it is Brooke Shields' energy, if we read it backwards, but it certainly ties into some of these themes that we have covered today.
That sounds great. I will look forward to checking that out. And that actually reminds me, the last thing I'll say about those Bellocq photographs is that, of course, the bodies look very different than what we would expect.
Right.
We've mentioned the heroin chic bodies. We mentioned Sydney Sweeney's body. And it is the case, right, that what we see in those Bellocq photographs from 1917, the bodies look very different.
Yeah.
Very different. And I mean, a really interesting way.
In a really, really, yes, in an interesting way. And in a way that was being debated and contested in America. Because within a few years, corsets by some will be abandoned.
Go away. We have the flapper body.
But a lot of Victorian women are really pushing against that. And so there's a whole kind of body dialogue that's happening, in the wartime period, and then certainly in the 1920s, and then with the booming of American advertising, we get all kinds of new expectations for women and new kinds of standards, which aren't attainable.
Never.
Okay,
well, I really enjoyed talking about this. I think that even though we had to watch a couple of tough movies.
We did. And I don't know if honestly, I don't know that I'd recommend the movies for this week.
I probably would not. I recommend other Louis Malle movies.
For people who I care about.
Actually, you know what? We need to point out that the cinematographer of Blue Lagoon was nominated for an Oscar.
Oh, good
Nestor
Lord.
Almondros.
All those
nominated. It was
around.
an Oscar-nominated film. Okay, I want next time you mention Blue Lagoon in any conversation, I want you to preface it by saying the Oscar-nominated film, The Blue Lagoon.
My other question about the Blue Lagoon, again, going back to the cosmetics of it all, when I talked about the hair, right? With the Blue Lagoon, this was before spray tans.
Oh,
and
yeah,
so
yeah,
I
yeah.
really do think about their perfect tans and the body makeup and how, and also Brooke Shields has some incredible highlights. And I wonder,
her hair is beautiful.
Her hair is amazing, and I wonder about how those highlights were so perfectly positioned on this. And also, did she make? Answer me this. Did she make her new outfit out of her little girl outfit? So like when she has the tying
that
little,
was my
the tie, the kind of like tie top, and then like she has a belly skirt.
Yeah,
that came from the outfit from when she was a little girl.
That was my
but
assumption.
the top still fits.
Yes, the top still fit. Shockingly enough.
And his little boy underwear still fit.
Yes. But he did have a nice little loincloth. And keep in mind, and that he is beardless. Right. He is beardless.
There are some kind of continuity and just kind of hygiene issues that I wonder about at least. Yeah. I do.
But, the glow of their love just...
There are no razors. Right? She
there
has...
are no razors. I don't know if her pits were shaved or her legs, but... Anyway.
Who cut the cord for the baby?
That's what I was wondering. Maybe they had like a really sharp rock. I was like, how do they even know to cut the cord? Did someone deliver the placenta? I hope.
Right. Yeah. No, the whole delivery of the baby, which I assume is by him, unless she just like squatted it onto the ground or something.
If I remember correctly, in the novel, she simply walks out into the jungle and comes back with a baby. So maybe she's still...
Well, my other question, again... multiple questions, granular questions. The baby is wrapped in a blanket. Yeah. And then we never see that blanket again.
No. But thank goodness it was there. But the baby's cute, though.
The baby is
adorable.
Do they ever change a diaper? That was my other question.
No.
Oh.
So many questions.
So many questions.
Okay, well, I think that's it for us for our 9th episode.
Amazing, Christine. Amazing.
We thank our 10 listeners, the Faith Militant, and we will look forward to seeing you next time.
And until then, Harpies out.
The